Hello and welcome to the Rusted Brush. Today we're going to be looking at my late war German force for bolt action. This project's been in work for a while, I would say around 5 years. It's built to represent a panzer division operating in the last years of the war. Adaptable enough to fit in any front, from the Eastern Front's frozen mud to the hedgerows of Normandy. The basing was to fit late fall or early winter season. I wanted to capture the worn look of a force that's been through a long campaign. Muddy uniforms, faded camo, and chipped paint. For me, this wasn't about recreating ideology or glorifying anything from history. It's purely a painting and modeling challenge. Most of my friends and people I know in my community play mostly on the Allied side, and someone has to play the baddies. So let's take a look at the army, from the infantry squads and support teams to the armor that makes the division feel complete. So to start with the infantry, I've got a fairly solid mix here. I have 40 infantry with rifles, 13 with SMGs, 17 with assault rifles, and 7 with light machine guns. This gives the force that late war flexibility I really like, squads that can either hold a line or push up aggressively depending on the mission. Generally, I like to keep my infantry cheaper, which is why I have more rifles than anything else. Most of these are a blend of warlordgames, the new Victrix plastic. The Victrix kits were a recent addition, and honestly I've been really enjoying working with them. The detail's sharper, the poses are a bit more natural, and they mix surprisingly well with the warlord models. For the painting, I wanted every squad to feel like a collection of veterans. Not exactly uniform, but cohesive. I mixed and matched camo smocks across the models, some with plain tree, others in oak leaf with both summer and fall variants. It's one of my favorite parts of collecting the late war Germans. You can get really creative with the variation, and the camouflage breaks up the unit visually in a way that still feels believable. Then I've got 3 special infantry groups that add a bit more narrative flavor to my collection. The first is my Gerbes squad, mountain troops with slightly different gear, and a great MG team that's one of my favorite in the army. I based them fairly differently to make them feel distinct and so they have more presence on the battlefield. Then there's the Late Winter Squad. These guys are meant for themed scenarios like at the Battle of the Bulge or on the Eastern Front. Heavier coats, whitewashed gear, and more subdued palette overall. I have 4 troops with infrared STG-44s known as Vampires. These make for great guards for my officers or for just marksmen. Together, all these units give me options for both regular gaming and more narrative setups, and honestly, painting the variety kept the whole project fun the entire way through. Moving on from the core infantry, I built a range of support teams to give the army more options and flexibility in different kinds of games. I've got 2 sniper teams. I like taking them in scenarios where board control and pinning are important. They're great for picking off weapon crews or softening up targets before an assault. They don't need much support, and they always earn their points back. The 2 flamethrower teams are there for clearing objectives or breaking through dug-in positions. They're risky to use, but when they do get in range, they completely change the flow of the battlefield. I also think they make for great bait, and also I have 2 of them just so I can run an engineer platoon if I have to. For direct fire support, I've got a medium machine gun team and a Panzerschreck team. The Panzerschreck team gives me a mobile anti-tank option that's easier to position than a static gun. The MG team helps anchor my infantry line. It's great for controlling open ground and supporting assaults. I also added Goliath Demolition Carrier. It's such an unusual bit of kit, and it's perfect for forcing your opponent to think twice about bunching up or holding a key point too tightly. Even if it never detonates, it always adds a psychological pressure that's fun to play around with. More or less though, I thought this thing just looks cool. The command section includes 3 officers at different ranks, 2 medics, and a couple of artillery observers with their spotters. I got a bunch of these from used collection, but I like to have multiple of certain things for narrative games or to change up what I'm bringing. Altogether, these support teams make the army more adaptable. They let me shift between defensive and offensive playstyles, and they help the collection feel like a complete functioning force, not just squads lined up next to tanks. For the artillery, I kept things pretty straightforward with just a Pak 40 and Howling Cow. Pak 40 gives the army a solid, reliable anti-tank options. It's one of those classic guns that always feels right in a late war list. Simple, effective, and great for holding a defensive position or locking down a lane. The Howling Cow adds a bit of chaos. It's not always the most consistent weapon, but it's fun to field and can really change the tone of a game when it does land a few good shots. It's fairly cheap in points as well. Sometimes it uses it as just terrain or an objective tease to add to the table. I didn't really go overboard with my artillery since I like the army to stay mobile, but having these 2 options give me enough long-range punch to support the rest of the list. Moving on to the transports and recon elements of the army, I like having a good mix of vehicles that add character and utility to the force. Starting with the Kettenkrad, it's a small but interesting piece. I always thought this thing was cool after seeing it in Saving Private Ryan, which is kind of why I added it. It's a great little addition for towing vehicles or adding atmosphere to a command group. The Kubelwagen is simple but fits perfectly as a light staff car or transport for an officer. I went for a cleaner look with this one. This is the only 3D printed model in the army, as I got this from a friend. The Opel Blitz serves as my cheapest transport option. It's a classic kit, and I really enjoyed airbrushing it to get the layered tone on the panels. I added a bit more pronounced weathering around the bed of the truck to show heavy use. It's practical in-game to move infantry or supplies around. Then there's the SD-KFZ-7, a bigger, heavier transport that I imagine working behind the lines, towing the Pack 40 or hauling equipment. I gave it heavier streaking and mud effects to show that it's been through a lot. It feels like a proper workhorse, and it adds a lot of presence on the battlefield. For the half tracks, I've got 2 SD KFZ 251s and 3 251/10. I painted them all using the airbrush, then added chipping and enamel washes to make them look a bit more battle-worn but not abandoned. The 25110s are especially useful. The light gun gives them a little bit of extra firepower for advancing with the infantry. I got 2 of the 251/10s from a used collection, otherwise I don't think I would normally have that many. Now onto recon or light vehicles. The Adler is a bit of an oddball in the lineup, but I got this after playing Call to Arms and I really enjoyed using it. This is an early war vehicle and I doubt any survived the end of the war, but I thought it was a fun vehicle to add anyways. The SD KFZ 222 is a very sleek and iconic vehicle. The open turret gives it a lot of visual interest and it's perfect for weathering. The German Dunkelgelb yellow is a fun color to paint and it looks great on this vehicle. I added decals and used the sponge chipping effects for weathering. The SD KFZ 250/9 has a similar role but a bit more punch. I really like the shape as it bridges the look between a half track and a recon car nicely. This I spent less time on as like many other vehicles I got, this is from a used collection. I added some foliage to it as well. You saw this on some of my other vehicles like the other ST KFZs already, and this is a fairly common sight you'll see on German armor. Finally, the SD KFZ 234/1. I treated this one like a miniature tank in terms of painting, weathering that emphasizes the size and weight of it. It's one of my more used vehicles and one of my first vehicles I painted for the army. Altogether, the transports and recon vehicles help define the tone of the army. They make it feel mobile, grounded, and more like an actual fighting formation rather than just a collection of tanks and infantry. Moving into the heavier vehicles, we'll be starting with the self-propelled guns and tank destroyers. First is the Stug 3. It's a compact, low-profile vehicle perfect for supporting infantry or holding a defensive line. It's another one of my first vehicles I got for the army. I painted it with the Dunkelgelb and just enamel washes afterwards. This is also my worst performing vehicle I have. For whatever reason, I just have the worst luck with this thing, so I think it's cursed. Next is the STUH-42. This is a much more recent paint job, and I went for a camo scheme instead of just Dunkelgelb. This looks a lot better than the Stug does, and I feel like the foliage helps it make it look a bit more distinct. It's designed to provide indirect fire, clearing infantry positions, and dug-in teams. I haven't used it yet, so it's too early to give an opinion on this one. Moving on to the heavier tank destroyers, I've got the Elephant, also known as the Ferdinand. This is a massive, imposing vehicle that dominates the board visually. I airbrushed the base tones, then layered washes and chipping to highlight the wear and edges, while keeping the historical decals accurate. Finally, the Jagdtiger, painted with the same airbrush first method. I focused on layering washes and edge chipping to give it a realistic, solid look. I got this used, so I hid some of the missing bits with foliage. It's a heavy hitter, and even though it's slow, it draws attention and commands space on the table. Now we get to the most important part of the army, the tanks. Since this force is meant to represent a panzer division, these vehicles are really the centerpiece. Everything else from the infantry to the recon elements is built around supporting them. Starting with the Panzer IV-H, it's the backbone of the division. This was the first tank I got, and also the first model I used an airbrush on. It's a tank that doesn't need to stand out, it's dependable, and that's what makes it so essential. The Panther is next, sleek, angular, and just a perfect design to paint, especially with an airbrush. Again, I got this used, and to hide some of those imperfections, I added foliage. Next is the Tiger one, probably the most recognizable of them all, and my favorite tank of all time. I took my time with this one, smooth airbrush gradients and chipping around the turret and hull edges, and just enough grime to show it's been through action. On the table and in the collection, it anchors everything else visually and tactically. This is also my best performing vehicle so far. In every game I've played, it's never been destroyed and has just been an absolute menace to all my opponents. And finally, the King Tiger. This one sits at the top of the armored chain. Massive, imposing, and unmistakable. I painted it like the centerpiece with layered tones, edge chipping, and deliberate weathering to make every surface feel very heavy and used. It's the kind of tank that draws the eye immediately, both on the tabletop and in the display case. Together, these 4 tanks form the core of the division, the backbone, the striking force, and the identity of the army. They tie the whole collection together, both visually and thematically, giving it that unmistakable feel of a panzer division in the final stages of the war. This has easily been one of my favorite projects to work on, and I'm finally glad I can say it's done. I don't really plan on adding anything else, I feel like it's pretty complete. Building and painting it wasn't just about collecting models, it became a way to really dive into the history behind them. As I started researching the different units, markings, and camouflage patterns, I found myself actually getting more invested in understanding how these divisions actually operated, where they fought, and how they adapted as the war went on. YouTube channels like Military History Visualized and the Tank Museum in Bovington have both been excellent points for researching. That research ended up shaping a lot of how I approached the army, from the decals and vehicle numbers to the tone of the paintwork and how the force is organized. It gave each part of the collection a purpose. I just wasn't painting tanks, I was recreating a small piece of how a real division might have looked in the field. That being said, I also did some things that maybe you wouldn't normally see, like the Adler for example. That's one of the fun things that pulled me into this hobby, was learning about things while I paint. The more I learned, the more it pulled me in. Not just into the hobby side of things, but into the broader history of the period. I think that's one of the great things about Bolt Action is that it connects the fun of modeling and gaming with the real history behind it and learning something from it. This isn't the only Bolt Action army I have. I have a US Marine Corps army that I'm still working on, and a Soviet army I got to start on. Anyways, thanks for watching, and thanks for taking the time to see the army in full. If you've been building your own historical forces or diving into the history side of the hobby, I'd love to hear about it. Please remember to like and subscribe. Take care, everyone.